feels like every music scene and genre has their guy. Someone so prolific and ubiquitous that they become the face of their respective genre and fundamentally shape the sound and aesthetic of the music to come after. For 2000s hip-hop, it was Lil Wayne. For folk punk, it's Pat the Bunny. For modern commercial punk, it's Travis Barker. Most iconic to me, though, is Jeff Rosenstock and his influence on ska punk, and the power pop underground. With direct membership in some of the most important bands in the scene's underground, and some degree of hands in countless dozens of others, not to mention one of the most excellent solo careers in music period, he's inarguably one of the most important people to ever grace the scene, regardless of what he might tell you. With someone so prolific and so massively influential, it can be easy to get overwhelmed with the ocean of material in front of you. It would have been easy enough for me to just make a "let's get you into Jeff Rosenstock's solo material" video, or even just include his most iconic side records, but no. I'm not gonna half-ass this. I'm gonna cover everything. That means his solo work and all 9 of the bands I could find that he has direct membership in. To be clear, I'll only be discussing records that he had a direct hand in, so stuff like the Bruce Lee band's early work is off the table because I simply don't have time and it isn't really relevant. This is going to be structured pretty much the same way as my Death Grips video, with a few more categories since we're working with way more records. We've got the starting records, other essentials, further listening, even further listening, and then some like oddballs and rarities, which is where we'll talk about some of the weirder and more outlier stuff. To start, let's talk about a record I've been waiting all year to talk about. This is it. This is Jeff's numero uno, cream of the crop masterpiece. Worry is the album that proved to me, and hopefully will prove to you, that Jeff is one of the most thoughtful and special musicians out there today. Not only that, but I would go so far as to call it the greatest pop-punk record of all time. Better than this one, or even this one. I haven't made a top albums list for myself in a while, but if I did, it would probably be in the top 10 ever, and I know I'm not the only one. Worry is a record that, while I don't know if it's resonated with everyone who's come in contact with it, it feels like basically everyone I know who loves it is absolutely obsessed with it. I bought my own vinyl copy of it in March of this year, and it already sounds notably worse from just the wear of dozens and dozens of times spinning it, not even taking into account the hundreds of times I've listened to it on the way to and from work. So why is Worry so magical? Well, it's a bunch of different things that I'll get into, but the biggest for me is just the clear, unironic love of the genre of pop-punk, and the passion that went into revitalizing and re-legitimizing a genre that has not really aged all that well in the eyes of society. And you know what? There's a lot of crap in that scene that has not withstood the test of time, undeniably, especially the rampant misogyny present in some of the biggest bands of the time's lyrics. But what I think makes Worry so impactful is that it takes that sound made popular by and for millennial teens, literal children a lot of the time, and it makes good on the promises of righteous angst and anger in a more adult context. Because you know what? Life does fucking suck. Your hometown is shitty. The government does hate you. Most of the bands of the era were made by and for people not yet old enough to really grasp the reasoning behind any of those things. But that vitriol is real. What Jeff did on Worry is take all those bands, all those aging scene kids, put a hand on their collective shoulder and say, "It's okay. I get it." And then proceed to wipe the fucking floor with all of them in terms of quality. Because, for as excellent as some songs in that era were, there's a certain finesse that comes with Jeff Rosenstock so far into his musical career. He's really on top of his game here with tight, energetic performances, unforgettable songwriting, and lyrics that show aging millennial core at its peak. If you've heard the album at least twice, I can guarantee that you can belt out all the lyrics to Hellhole croon along with the opening track, and have at least one part of the final medley that you've gotten emotional to. Oh yeah, did I mention the medley in the back half? Yeah, this record takes the Abbey Road approach and makes side B one long medley, and for as much as I love the fantastic pop songs of the first half, this second half is one of the best sides of a record I've ever heard, seamlessly crafting a tapestry of millennial angst that perfectly captures the highs and lows of loving someone under late capitalism. That's another reason I love Worry so much. It is the perfect having a crush album. Lyrically, it's all anti-capitalist and very punk, of course, but all of that goes through the lens of interpersonal connections and relationships, and how capital taints and breaks those if we don't fight to keep them pure. The point of Worry, and I think of most of Jeff's catalog, is that people come first. They have to come first. Friends, partners, family, these mean more than any made-up line ever will, more than any internet number or dollar figure ever can. It's a record that I come back to when I want to think of my friends and what they mean to me. It's the record I come to when I want to feel lucky for the people in my life who love me and who I love in return. It's a record that reminds me that all this crap, follow counts, wages, stocks, it's all meant to distract us from what really matters, because if we choose to ignore those things in favor of love, we win. Worry is a contender for my favorite album of all time. It means so much to me, and I hope it'll mean something to you. Notable tracks include We Beg to Explode, Festival Song, and the entire Side B medley.
Phil's living up in Chicago. Maddie's working hard in Ohio. Dixie and Chris are very far away.
I think if I was in a different emotional state when I got into Jeff's stuff, this would be my favorite album of his. Yes, I think Worry is better, but his breakout solo debut is absolutely a masterpiece and a contender for his best work. It's a bit rougher around the edges, more raw, but it hits so different that I don't even know if the two are worth directly comparing. Where Worry was about an aging millennial trying to learn how to love under capitalism, We Cool is about that millennial realizing he's aging. It's about getting old, losing and gaining new friends, dissociating your own achievements from who you are, and realizing you didn't grow up to be the person you thought you were going to. And that's why I say it could have been my favorite if I'd found it later in my life, because the thing is, I'm young. I'm very young, in fact. I was 18 when I started this channel, and just now I turned 20. I'm not an aging millennial, I'm a zoomer. And while there's certainly something to be said about the world I'm growing up in, with constant internet access and the need to perform myself kind of forcing me to grow up fast and act older than I am, I still feel young, and know that I have a few more years to go before I lose that. But it is coming. I don't know when or how, but I'm gonna stop being young someday. I'm gonna start having to come to terms with being at least a little out of touch with what's cool. I'm gonna realize that I'm not a kid anymore, and some of the stuff I can get away with now will be embarrassing if I try to compare them later to my highest achieving peers. When that happens, We Cool will go from a record that I relate to on a hypothetical level to a record that I use to feel understood in my anxieties. I just know it. Some of Jeff's best songs are on here, all fitting this theme, of course. Nausea is his biggest hit, and it's not hard to see why. The existential horror of mundanity is the name of the game here, and with a fantastic chorus and diverse instrumentation, it's an easy banger. The multi-phased Polar Bear or Africa is another career highlight, with the absolutely crushing bridge acting as probably the best in his whole career and the center point for the entire album. My favorite track, though, is I'm Serious, I'm Sorry. Maybe you didn't grow up to be who you wanted to be, but you're here right now when so many people never got to see today, and that feeling of failing your duties to achieve in the place of those who didn't get to live long enough to see their own dreams is just so crushing. I don't think there's another song in his catalog that can so reliably get me choked up. Another masterpiece from Jeff, We Cool is just as solid a starting place as Worry, and should be given just as much attention. Notable tracks are the three I mentioned already.
They look Looking at me with your glassy eyes, they're gonna bury me. Dripping with Hennessy and ecstasy, they're gonna bury me.
Now we start getting into Jeff's bands, and I think there's no better place than possibly his biggest, Bomb the Music Industry. While the band's origins as a harder punk and ska group make up the majority of their discography, I decided to include the band's final, least punk record, Vacation, as the most essential. Why? Well, for one, because it's the best in my opinion, but also because it acts as the perfect bridge between Jeff's band and solo careers, both in chronological and reverse chronological sequence. Vacation sees the band in a place where they clearly knew their time was up. It's a final hurrah if I've ever heard one, and for this grand finale, they took a turn into indie that, while it may have alienated some old school fans, resulted in one of Jeff & Co.'s most honest records to date. Punk runs through the record's veins a bit, how could it not with the band's history and Jeff's own input, but it feels more like a punk making an indie album, giving it seasoning while still letting the more approachable songwriting style bring the lyrics and meaning to the forefront. Vacation is probably the most metaphorical record in Jeff's catalog, with lyrics constantly drawing comparisons. He compares his own anxieties to a car crash on the opener, he compares his inadequacies to dusty records on Vocal Coach, and ultimately he compares the band's entire career to the titular Vacation. It was a fun escape, but like any vacation, it has to come to an end, and we all have to pack up and go back to the real world. It's all strikingly honest. Jeff's more poetically dramatic lines never come off as trite, his angst and venting of emotions never comes off as cringy or woe is me. It's all just very real, matter of fact. Nothing is ever overblown nor understated. It's all put in accurate wording and vocalized with the justified level of emotion. And then, of course, comes the songwriting and the songs themselves, which naturally are perfect. Jeff still knew back then how to create the perfect pop tune, and as we'll see looking back even further in the discography, kind of always did. Switching to a more indie aesthetic sonically only allowed for new types of excellent songwriting, and makes for absolute masterpieces like Everybody That You Love and Can't Complain. It isn't selling out if it makes for even better music, and the chip tunes, piano interludes, and sunshine pop vibes undeniably make for more diverse, excellent music. If there's a word to describe the record, it's conclusive. It feels like the bittersweet ending of a band of people who love each other very much, but know that it's time to call it quits. By the same token, though, it works as the perfect starting point from which to work backwards into Bomb's previous stuff, and even into his other bands. Notable tracks are Vocal Coach, Everybody That You Love, and Felt Just Like Vacation.
We got the bottle of Jameer, started drinking. I drink a minute. I'm too distracting from my content overthinking. I need a breather.
Now from Bomb's last to one of their first, Goodbye Cruel World shows the band at their peak of energy, as one of the most insane albums they ever did. Endlessly creative, there's not a dull moment across the entire thing, and it feels like there's always another weird idea that on paper sounds like it shouldn't work, but with Bomb's pure songwriting genius manages to just serve as texture to one of the most creative punk records of the century so far. Chiptune ska? Hardcore with 808s? Why not? It does lead to every song's first 3 seconds being jarring as hell, but it doesn't take much longer than that to always sell me on the product. That's a dumb joke about the lyrical content of the album, which, as can be expected from Jeff, is blatantly anti-capitalist. This time around, though, it may be the most blatant and obvious it's ever been. Side Projects Are Never Successful is the most memorable in this regard for me, with the line, every Fugazi record has a catalog number and a price tag, and every independent label is selling you another goddamn product. And then at the end, where he lists all the name brand products he consumes regularly to help him sell the idea on stage to kids that corporate rock is for suckers. To the band's credit, though, this and all Bomb the Music Industry records were released on Jeff's donation-based label, the first of its kind, quote-unquote records. In an era so far removed from that of MP3 players and iPods, it might not seem all that special for a band's website to include full downloads of their albums, but you have to keep in mind that when Radiohead did this in 2007 with In Rainbows, it was a landmark moment in music history, and Goodbye Cool World came out a full year before that. What's also interesting is that this is probably the most Bomb the Music Industry has lived up to their name lyrically, with full-scale attacks on the industry like my response to an article in Alternative Press and Martyrdom to Starterdom. This is Bomb at their most aggressive and confrontational, and it's still refreshing even over 15 years down the road. Combine that with the pure uniqueness of the band's sound at this point, and you end up with what is simply one of the coolest punk records in recent memory. Key tracks include Even Winning Feels Bad, Side Projects Are Never Successful, and It's Official We're Boring. Arrogant Sons was Jeff's first band, and while this might be their only truly great record, good god, what a fantastic record. Arguably the greatest ska punk album ever recorded, Three Cheers for Disappointment is Jeff at his most manic, imperfect, and rage-fueled, flipping through ska styles like TV channels with so much ferocity and so little cohesion it's impossible not to get washed up in the adrenaline blitz. Is it technically perfect? No fucking way, but is it a masterpiece? Unquestionably. Instrumentally, it's pure ska punk bliss, with the classic upstroke clean guitar sound, distorted power chords and octaves, clean palm mutes, plodding bass, and of course the staple horns that either fill out the mix or take center stage. It's high energy, it's technical, and it's so much fucking fun. Structurally, I've heard people call this prog punk and math punk, and while I wouldn't go that far, the hectic and almost paranoid sounding song structures definitely warrant at least the comparison. It's kind of interesting to me that the lyrics of this thing are simultaneously so personal and so universal. Some of these experiences are so unique to Jeff, and yet the emotions on display are totally relatable. The way they blend as well between interpersonal and systemic anger, between rage at other people, at the government, and at himself, makes for one of the most compelling portrayals of teenage confusion, intentionally or not. It's hard to really muster up a more in-depth explanation for this record, despite thinking it's obviously one of the best things Jeff's ever put out. I think that might just be more of a testament to the blind, adrenaline-fueled hype this album puts me in. It's really hard for me to think too hard about this music when I'm listening to it because it just gets me so pumped that my brain shuts off. In its own special way, I think that makes it just as much a masterpiece as any of the others we've talked about so far. Notable tracks include So Let's Go Nowhere, 1-800-ALARM ME, and Disappointment at the Taco Bell.
Sam, your mom has secretly been renting out your home. I use your shower sponge when you wet to spit alone.
When No Dream dropped in mid-2020, I pretty immediately claimed it as my favorite Jeff Rosenstock album. It came out at the perfect time for me, and I think a lot of people, with its heavily political and very direct anger. You have to remember that this was peak COVID time, everyone was out of a job, it was an election year at the end of the Trump era, and we were on the cusp of some of the biggest political protests in recent history. It was a super radicalizing time for myself and many others, and because of that, there was never a better time for Jeff to drop what is likely his most politically blatant solo album. Take the title track, for example, which first tackles the ease with which both mainstream and social media turn tragedy and despair into white noise to keep us complacent, letting us think there's nothing we can do. We get a refrain that urgently reminds us that this isn't a dream, these are real lives at stake, yours included, before launching headfirst into a rapid-fire teardown of capitalism, neoliberalism, and the ways our leaders benefit off of our hopelessness. Jeff has moved past the more intimate, personal uncovering of the effect corporatism has had on his life, and this album feels like a more direct unmasking of the powers above and a rallying cry against the machinery that lies beneath. Musically, it's no slouch either, with some of the most memorable hooks, melodies, and riffs in his entire catalog. One of my personal favorites is B&B, with its light synth line following the verse melody before ushering the standard giant guitars for the chorus. Jeff is also on the top of his game here vocally, truly putting in the effort to give every word purpose. I don't know if we've heard him sounding this hungry since Bomb the Music Industry's early stuff, and it doesn't even come at the cost of approachable and fun pop-punk structure and presentation. While it currently sits as the last main studio record from Jeff, it's hard to imagine him stopping here, and it definitely doesn't sound like a send-off, but rather an excellent middle period or a second act in his solo career that will take him to even more exciting places. The tracks of note here include No Time, Scram, and Leave It in the Sun.
You got your temp job, and you put your 2 days in. Prefer a guy sitting shirt.
Kudrow's discography is two things. One, it's 17 minutes long, and two, the single most underrated part of Jeff's entire career. In the limited space of a 7-inch record, he reminds us all exactly why he's one of the most exciting musicians in the scene. With noisier production, high energy, and new collaborators, this short-lived project really shines for its standout songwriting and its jovial tone. Plus, this is the one time we get to hear Jeff really rock a baritone guitar. With only 4 songs, it would be stupid to try and pick 3 highlights, but instead I would encourage you to seek out the group's split with Hard Girls called Boo, which extends the fun for just a couple more minutes. Back to Bomb for a little bit, we've got a pair of records that I would say are pretty unanimously understood to be on a similar level to Vacation. First, let's talk about my favorite, Scrambles. Honestly, when it comes to Bomb, it's a pretty big toss-up to which is my favorite, and while Vacation and Goodbye Cool World and the next one we'll talk about are all fantastic obviously, I'm also shocked by how often I find myself settling temporarily with this one as my number 1. I don't even know why it's a surprise, because every time I listen I am absolutely blown away, but I think it might just be a personal disconnect for me between the song titles and the music. Similarly to other favorites of mine like Modest Mouse's Moon in Antarctica, I often look at the track list and I can't really remember what any of the songs sound like from the titles. But the second they start, I go, oh shit, that's this song! That's made even more ironic by the fact that this album has far and away the best song titles of any record we'll talk about today, be it Shits with 3 exclamation marks, or Gang of 4 meets the Stooges but boring, or Can I Pay My Rent in Fun. The sense of humor is absolutely on point. But on to the actual music. This is basically the perfect midpoint for me between Vacation and classic Bomb like Goodbye Cool World. It's got this beautiful balance of indie rockisms and hook-driven songwriting combined with simply the most excellent punk instrumentation and noisy production out there. Ska takes a lot less forefront than previously, but still holds a very important influence over the song's directions, and imbues the slightly more grounded, less chaotic tracks with a sense of fun just as powerful as before. That brings me nicely into the lyrics, which, as every good aging millennial core album should, tackle existential crises with enough humor and levity to keep it enjoyable. Scrambles is, shocker, about the trials and tribulations of being an adult. More than that, though, it's about getting knocked down, getting back up, getting knocked right back down, and keeping getting up, because even if it's hard, you don't really have any choice but to keep getting back up. It's naively hopeful as it is grimly nihilistic, and by drenching it in gang vocals and relatable humor, not hashtag relatable, mind you, it becomes one of the most cohesive records in the whole catalog. I can't emphasize enough that this album is just as essential as any of the others here. I love it so much, and while I often forget that, Anytime I remember, it's always here to bring me an awesome time. Notable tracks include Stuff That I Like, Sadder, Weirder, and 25.
Mold and mice and stolen bikes and a van. Everybody wants to break into.
Immediately following Scrambles comes what may be a contender for my favorite EP of all time, taking everything that made Bomb such an incredible band and condensing it down into one 20-minute masterpiece. It's the most refined and tight release the band ever put out and stands as the perfect cap-off to this Essentials section. Musically, it truly encapsulates all the best elements: the ska, the synth and chiptune, the almost Pinkerton-esque noisy power pop guitar riffs and solos, not to mention the massive power chords. Every song has an amazing hook, powerful verse instrumentals, a great left field instrument inclusion like a synth or brass, and some of the most fantastically arranged punk compositions out there. It'd make even Brian Wilson, mentioned on the first track, proud. And lyrically, once again, we just get further evidence that Jeff is one of the greatest lyricists in the genre, with some of the most heavily relatable feelings and emotions underpinning super specific and memorable situations and stories. Adulthood is stressful, anxious, exciting, scary, and relentless, and I think this EP is the greatest representation of that out there. The closing chants of, "I don't want to go outside because I might have a terrible day and get sent home," is so resonant and so ingrained in my mind, as with nearly every other hook and assorted lines across the record. Again, at only 20 minutes long, it's really hard to draw out an explanation of its content more than I already have, but don't mistake that for it being any less essential, as it is arguably the most essential of this entire category. Key tracks include You Still Believe in Me, Slumlord, and The First Time I Met Santa One. For as much of a bombshell as We Cool was, it wasn't actually Jeff's first solo album under his name. That award goes to I Look Like Shit, which is a solo album in every sense of the word. With little more than a drum machine, keyboard, a guitar, and his own voice, he made an entire record of power pop bangers. And it's really impressive. Not only is the sound really great considering the limitations, but some of Jeff's greatest songwriting quirks are shown unfiltered here and result in some of his absolute best songs. Twinkle opens the record in the best way any song could, with a massive chorus, unbelievably memorable falsetto vocal peaks, and a really epic structure that seriously solidifies it as one of the best songs he ever did. It doesn't stop there either. Career highlights dot the entire project, and while at times the lower production value can hold it back, in particular the machine drums, as the start of a project, it's very nearly fully formed. Some of the most essential tracks here include Twinkle, 80s through the 50s, and Bonus Oceans.
Dumbfounded, downtrodden, and dejected, crestfallen, grief-stricken, and exhausted, trapped in my room while the house was burning to the motherfucking ground.
While this is my least favorite mainline Jeff Rosenstock album, I want to preface this by saying it is far from a bad album. I still kinda love it, and there's a lot to glean from it. Starting with my main issue so we can get to the great stuff ASAP, it's mostly just a lack of consistency, especially towards the middle section. For as excellent as the respectively 7 and 11 minute opener and closer are, many of the tracks in between just don't feel like they're quite up to snuff, especially with how capable Jeff has proven himself to be with those shorter song lengths. With that being said, a truly fantastic open and close that take up nearly half the record hold almost the whole thing up by themselves with their great dynamic progressions and the anthemic power pop choruses we've come to expect, given more long-form room to breathe. Other great tracks like Your Throat and especially 9 Times Out of 10 would absolutely keep the record as a worthy inclusion in the discography, but I would be lying if I said it's anywhere near my most revisited. Still, notable tracks include USA, Let Them Win, and 9 Out of 10.
Oh, look who's back, and look who it is, Chris Farron! Holy shit! Holy fucking shit! Holy...
If there's one good reason to listen to Post, it's this. Jeff Rosenstock is, I can only imagine, one of the greatest live shows you could possibly see, and this live record is absolutely evidence of that. In fact, this is very likely my favorite live album of all time, and the only reason I don't have it up in the Essentials is because it's a recording from the Post tour, and I think it benefits greatly from having heard all the prior material before listening. After all, how are you supposed to scream your lungs out along to songs you don't even know? Something about the performances, both from Jeff and the band, elevates even the less exciting songs to new heights here, and the sequencing with his absolute best tracks keeps a totally level playing field for all of them. What's most important here, though, is the personality and energy of Jeff's performance and his interactions with both the band and the audience. Jeff has a notoriously good stage presence and banter, which we'll talk about later, but it can't be overstated how visual this recording feels because of its inclusion. Close your eyes and you can fully see the whole scene of him and his band on stage in a mid-sized venue, with everyone screaming their brains out and having a blast. Basically every huge song you would want is on here, and if you manage to get the now depressingly expensive vinyl version, it comes with a bonus Sorry Thanks EP, which I'm pretty sure takes place at the same show, and has a few more weird deep cuts for the super fans. This is an awesome show, and if you're a big fan of live albums generally, this is more than essential. It's the gold standard. Do you like ska? Did you like No Dream? You'll like this album. It's about as straightforward as the name suggests. Originally announced on April Fool's 2021 with a release date of 4/20, there was no way it was going to be real, right? And yet here we are, and it absolutely slaps. Just masterful ska punk all around with tight performances, great wide production, and a lot of the time a total tonal shift, or at least enhancement, from the original tracks. Add in a few features that weren't there before, like Ska 2 Network and Pup, and you've got a recipe for a good time. Not much else to say really, it's just more ska from Jeff, showing that he's still got it. Notable tracks here include the title track, Pick It Up, and especially Ohio Pork Pie. Jeff's old band before they were a band. This 2005 debut is almost more impressive than I Look Like Shit, considering how much it predates that record. Everything on this album is written and recorded by Jeff in his bedroom. As a ska punk solo debut, it's genuinely remarkable, and the use of synths and keyboards set it far apart from the previous Arrogant Sons of Bitches material. There was definitely a fair ways to go in terms of production and lyrical concepts, but as a tight, almost seamless 30-minute adrenaline rush, it goes unfairly hard, and painted a clear trajectory for the project to follow and become what they ended up. Notable tracks are Future 86, Ready Set No, and It Ceases to Be Whining If You're Still Shitting Blood. Labeled as a mini-album by the band, this is Bomb the Music Industry's first studio recording as a full group, and at a brisk 25 minutes, serves as a proper mission statement for what the band could do together. While the songwriting is super straightforward punk and pop, the types of instrumentation used here were, and still are, super creative. Pianos, chimes, prominent acoustic guitars, horns, and all different kinds and uses of electric guitar and bass. Songwriting is even more refined than on album minus band, and even more memorable moments pepper the whole thing, be it the "and go ahead and get fucked" refrain in Dude Get With the Program, or the blistering intensity of Shower Beers. As with all the best Jeff projects, I feel like it would be so easy to get super obsessed with it if it was one of your firsts, and even as one of the ones I came to later on, I appreciate it greatly. Notable tracks are Stand There Till You're Sober, Congratulations John on Joining Every Time I Die, and Psych, Life is Awesome.
I bought a couch and a grill and a table with chairs paid for gas like the whole way down here. Electric and cable, a shelf and a table, almost $100 worth of extra.
I may be putting Get Warmer down here as the least essential Bomb the Music Industry album, but don't get that twisted as me saying it's not good. In fact, it's pretty great. It's the first album with a wholly live band consisting of over 20 different members. Because of this, as well as just a larger production budget, it is the most high-quality recording the band had put out to that point, with more dynamic range and a warmer sound than anything up to that point. With all of that, you might be surprised to know that very little of the aggression is lost, and it arguably has better hooks than any of their previous works. My main issue mostly is that it feels a little less creative. By this point, I think the band was in need of a shakeup in songwriting, bigger than just switching to fully live instrumentation could provide. Luckily, that shakeup came fairly immediately with Scrambles, and it's definitely not like this record isn't worthwhile. Tracks like the title track, 493 Ruth, and the biggest song by the band, I Don't Love You Anymore, keep it worth returning to as much as any other. In 2014, Jeff started a band with Fake Problems vocalist Chris Farron called Antarctico Vespucci. Together, they've released 1 EP and 3 albums of fun power pop, each of them taking equal part in all the instrumentals and vocals. It really feels like two dudes making catchy songs that they want to sing together, and I have nothing but respect for that. The main reason I'm lumping them all together is frankly just because I don't think I have enough to say about any of these albums individually that wouldn't end up just repeating from one to the other. Of the 4 releases, their EP I'm So Tethered is by far my favorite, especially the first 2 songs, but beyond that, Leavin' La Vida Loca has some of my other favorite Jeff moments ever. Chris isn't to be ignored either, as he's a great vocalist and his contribution to the instrumentals is obvious, as they don't sound very much like solo Jeff tracks at all. I personally don't come back to this project much, as I find it a bit samey from one to the next, but I can't deny tracks like I'm Giving Up on You Too, You Don't Scare Me, and I See Failure are some of the better songs either member has written.
He said, "AJ Fraser was a fucking thing, now gives him the aid. I'm about to mess a cry, no reason than a drink."
For as essential as 3 Cheers is, I would be lying if I said the first 2 albums and 2 EPs from the Arrogant Sons came even close to that level. They're stupid, obnoxious, and they sound like absolute shit. And yet, I really do like them. There's something really weirdly appealing about hearing a bunch of 15-year-olds own their songwriting skills in real time, and while there's certainly a lot of crap to cut through, it makes those telling moments of genius feel even more rewarding. Built to Fail, their debut, has an actually pretty good remaster out there if you're willing to find it, and All the Little Ones Are Rotting EP has a bunch of early versions of 3 Cheers tracks, but with the more youthful sloppiness and energy. The Apology EP kinda stinks, and Pornocracy never got the same remaster treatment as the first record, but I still don't think anyone who goes in knowing what to expect will come out with nothing to show for it, especially when a track like The Guy from Subway exists.
From my life support, my iron love.
The real reason you should listen to the first few releases, though, is these bootlegs you can find on YouTube of the band playing full 40-minute cover song sets as Radiohead, and then a year later as Nirvana. These covers are manic, insane, and often absolutely genius. It's not like the band plays them straight, not even close. Instead, these are fully arranged ska reinterpretations that, while they do poke fun at the bands, clearly come from a place of deep respect and fandom, especially the Radiohead one, which, keeping in mind that this is 2003, contains some crazy deep cuts and also tracks off the newly released Hail to the Thief. True Love Waits had never been released outside of a live EP, remember. The performances of My Iron Lung, Just, and Fake Plastic Trees here are particularly excellent, and the crowd participation all throughout makes it so stupidly fun from front to back. The Nirvana one plays it a little safer, out of necessity really, considering the sheer scale of the band. but it's hard not to wish a B-side off Incesticide or something like that had been included. Still, the hits are played well, and while the available recording of this is not nearly as quality as that of the Radiohead show, the quieter, more introspective moments still shine, and the arrangements are still very creative, especially the sax work. Overall, these are great for any fan of ska, Jeff, Nirvana, or Radiohead. Check them out. From here, let's look at some of the projects left over, some less prominent bands, and some deep cuts for the fans, starting with one of the most underrated. The Bruce Lee Band is a ska band started by Mike Park in the mid-90s, which, up until 2005, contained backing members from groups like Less Than Jake and RX Bandits. They released 2 albums and then essentially disappeared from the face of the earth. That is, until 2014, when Jeff and Mike got together and revived it, releasing the Community Support Group EP, and then later that year their first full album together in Everything Will Be Alright, My Friend. This album rules and has some of the most fun ska material of the past decade in my opinion, so I was ecstatic to see the band come back again 5 years later with Rental Eviction, which is by far my favorite of their works. The sax and bass lines are super fun, the energy is high, and Mike is a really great vocalist for the genre. They've since released another EP and an album this year, which is sadly going under the radar, but honestly, if you're already into ska or have gotten into it because of this video, you owe it to yourself to check these guys out. Would you believe me if I told you that this weird synth-punk slash indie-tronica slash rap group from the mid-2000s was actually my first exposure to Jeff Rosenstock? Yeah. Funnily enough, I was one of the few people who played that terrible remake of Tony Hawk for the PS3, and one of the very few songs on that game's licensed track list was Marathon Mansion off of Pegasus' first album. I never noticed it, to be honest, but when I went back to dig deep into this dude's catalog, I was shocked to find that I already knew this song, and that it was definitely the best song the band ever put out. Intense Andy Morin-esque synths are the backdrop for some of the weirdest and often most cringe and uncomfortable, but occasionally endearing music Jeff has ever done. I can't say there's anything they've done that I love, but it all sounds like they had fun, and if you're looking for a huge change of pace from what we've heard before, they're definitely worth at least a peek. Back to Jeff's solo stuff again. Let's take a quick look at a couple of worthwhile EPs he's put out. First, we've got the Summer EP, which, while it is only 2 short songs, contains Teenager, which is one of his best. Go On Get is also an awesome anthemic track, and it's a shame neither of these will ever get that much attention. Secondly, we've got the split with South Korean ska punk band Ska Sucks. The Jeff songs here are just fantastic, with Never Gonna Get It Back Again being so awesome, and having a great version of it on Sorry Thanks. Then there's the cover of Patsy Cline's She's Got You, which goes once again to show that Jeff knows really well how to make a cover of his own, and has a great sense of what tracks he would fit best on. Don't sleep on Ska Sucks, by the way. I'm not crazy about their side here, but that's not to say you won't like it, especially if you're already into ska. Speaking of covers, we can now talk about the Still Young EP Jeff did with Laura Stevenson, formerly of Bomb, who has now gone on to have her own successful career as a singer-songwriter. This is a pretty good set of Neil Young covers ranging from across Young's career, with the obvious highlight being the opening cover of Harvest Moon. Jeff is definitely a little out of his element at times here, but Laura keeps him grounded at all times and absolutely carries this thing. Definitely worth a spin.
I used to walk up to the docks in spring, drink tall boys on the rocks by the water.
While we're at it, there's actually another live album to talk about. It's a little tougher to find these days, but this recording of him playing an acoustic set at Vinyl Paradise is still so good. It comes right after Worry, so you get all the best tracks you'd want to hear, and the more folk-punk energy of the arrangement suits him better than you might even expect. He still goes for every single high note, which, while it can be jarring in a funny way, speaks to him as a performer and makes some of these tracks, notably Nausea, feel just awesome. Also, special shout out to I'm Serious, I'm Sorry again. Now real quick back to Bomb. They have a couple of EPs left over as well, all of them splits with other bands. First there's the President's Day split with the Rick Johnson Rock and Roll Machine, which sees Bomb in an interesting place where during their 3 songs, which take up only 4 minutes of the 8-minute runtime, they kind of take up Rick Johnson's high-speed synth-punk sound, and as much as I do like Rick Johnson's side here, Bomb the Music Industry absolutely bodies him at his own game with some of their most unique material. The whole thing is up on YouTube, and at such a short runtime, you may as well give it a listen. Next we have the split with O Pioneers, a hardcore punk band I wasn't sure why I recognized before I realized they did a split with AJJ, which I absolutely loved. O Pioneers' side is great here, unsurprisingly, but naturally I'm a bigger fan of the Bomb stuff, especially I'm Terrified and This Is a Sing-Along, some of their most fun songs in their deeper catalog. This one's easy to find, so don't skip out on it. And finally, back to Laura again, I guess. Bomb has a split with Laura Stevenson and the Cans, and while she definitely holds her own with her indie folk, including a cover of It Ceases to Be Whining, and a shine to it is a very good Bomb song, I need to shout out There's My Bailout as absolutely a top contender for best Bomb the Music Industry deep cut. That I Wanna Kiss You on That Crane refrain still gets stuck in my head to this day. Here's a weird one for me, because I absolutely do think this band deserves their own dive, and maybe someday, years from now, I'll find the drive to do that. But for the purposes of this video, I wasn't quite sure what to do, because obviously I'm only talking about albums that Jeff is included on, and look, it's really hard to figure out who's credited on what albums here. Shinobu is a lo-fi indie rock band from the early 2000s who are actually still going to this day. They've got 5 albums and a bunch of EPs, and I cannot figure out, for the life of me, which of these damn things Jeff plays on, so I'm just going to briefly talk about the whole band and leave you to dive in if you so choose. And I highly suggest you do. These guys are awesome. Shinobu's one of those bands where your favorite bands probably took influence from them. Pup, Joyce Manor, and Touche Amore all have cited this band as a major influence, and in listening to the music, it's easy to see why, with the high energy, sappy Midwest emo lyrics, and dedication to catchy songwriting. All of their works are at least good, but I want to give a special shout out to Worst Word Ho, Strange Spring Air, and Exhaustive Exhaustive. These 3 are all excellent indie rock albums with just a tinge of Midwest emo leanings. Okay, more than a tinge on Worst Word, but I digress. The best of these, in my opinion, is Exhaustive, but the title isn't exactly wrong, as this thing clocks in at 30 tracks and nearly 2 hours of runtime. If that sounds like too much for you right out of the gate, definitely try the other 2 I mentioned, and who knows, you might find a new favorite band. Finally, we're wrapping this damn thing up. I'm not going to give long paragraphs about any of these, but let me just shout out some fun projects and little oddities I came across and heard while I was digging in for this video. We've got the Know How, a tiny underground ska band who Jeff played sax for. They've got 4 albums from the early 2000s, but then randomly last year they dropped a self-titled EP. I'm pretty sure Jeff isn't on that, but it's always wild to see a small band stay inactive for so long and then just come back so confidently. a couple more Jeff solo oddities. There's his 2020 dump, which was a bunch of little songs he wrote and recorded throughout the year in 2020, gradually adding more to the Bandcamp before finishing it in August 2021. There's Music for Cartoons, which is a bunch of little instrumental ditties he did for the kids' show Craig of the Creek, and then there's In the Key of the Creek, which plays out as more of a 10-minute musical sung by the show's characters and composed and performed by Jeff. Cielito Lindo is a little EP featuring two versions of a Spanish song, first a punk version and then a waltz version. And then I wouldn't be doing justice to myself if I didn't talk about Super Talk, and the lengths I went to find it. Real shit, I thought this didn't exist because I was looking everywhere for it based on a Rate Your Music page with only 2 ratings. Just as I thought I would never hear it, I finally stumbled across it in a random-ass folder where someone had collected a bunch of MP3 files. The file was 40-some minutes long and was simply titled, Jeff Rosenstock Doesn't Want You to Hear This. And there it was. 40 minutes of stage banter without a hint of music, and you know what? It fucking rules. I love this shit. And now some bomb oddities. There's some demos out there for Scrambles and Vacation that were recently released. If that's your bag, there's a cover of Gold Sounds by Pavement they did for the Under the Influence series. And then there's this really cool little 7-inch release that you'll never find, but the music is out there online. It was a party favor for friends of the band Scott and Aubrey for their wedding in 2012. It features 4 of their favorite bands, including Bomb, covering 4 of their favorite songs, including Weezer's El Scorcho, and Bomb's contribution of Punk Rock Girl by the Dead Milkmen. And then there's the Others Volume 1 compilation, which sadly never got a sequel. This is an incredibly bizarre collection of B-sides, unreleased tracks, and demos that you can still get on their website to this day. There's some fucking wild stuff in here, but also some of their best songs. It still baffles me that this is the only way to hear The Soul Crushing Northeast, one of the best songs the band has ever recorded. And just for fun, I'll shout out the Album Minus Jeff tribute records. There's 2 volumes, both unwieldy and long, far too long to listen to in one sitting, but they contain dozens upon dozens of super passionate covers of songs that Jeff has had a hand in throughout the years, played by little bands that I had never heard of prior to this. If you're looking for more punk acts outside the mainstream, these compilations are genuinely one of the best ways to find them. That's it, right? Right? I'm done now? Well,
I wake up in the morning, wipe the cigarette from my eyes. I look around the room, will it smell and make me cry?
I couldn't help myself. I know I said I was only going to cover albums that Jeff had a direct hand in, but I lied. He played bass for this little band called Nothing Rhymes with Orange, but isn't present on their one recording. Which is a shame, because this would be a fun thing to have your name attached to. I'm mostly talking about this because, 1, I think it's really good, and 2, I've already probably just put more words into this thing than anyone else has ever. It's a super fun little indie rock 7-inch with energized sloppy performances, no production value, and charismatically snotty female vocals, and it makes me pretty sad that they never recorded anything ever again, because this is honestly one of the most underrated things I've talked about in this whole video. You can find it on Bandcamp, and I highly recommend you do. These folks deserved more attention than they ever got when they were around, so give it to them now to make up for it. And, whew, I think that's it. I did it. This has been the largest undertaking I think I've done on this channel, and I probably burned out on it about 3 times, to the point where I bet a lot of you were wondering if I'd already quit. But no, I'm back, and I'm ready to talk about music again. Maybe even video games, who knows. In the time since my last video, my subscriber count has multiplied like 8-fold, so to all you new folks, welcome. This long of a wait isn't normal, but hopefully it was worth it, because I'm really happy with what came out. Special shout out to the patrons who, for some reason, stuck around this long. At shockingly popular request, I've decided to make a Discord server for donors of $3 and up, where you can talk to me directly about music and also talk with the small other handful of people who care enough and want to build a community with me. You'll get updates on in-progress videos, and generally I expect it to be a pretty small but fun community, as most music-based ones are. Thanks so much for waiting and for watching. I'm gonna go start on my next project. I'll see you soon.